Please save my brother.
This compass, it was my father's.
Aspen, a whiteout blizzard. A Millionaire CEO opens his glass door to two small boots in the snow. One boy collapses in his arms, the other clutches a cracked compass that matches the one on his desk. He lost the woman he loved years ago. Did he lose his sons, too? If this compass points home, will he be brave enough to follow? The storm had a voice that night, a low roar that pressed against the glass walls of Ethan Carter's home and made the pines bow like penitents. Aspen vanished into white, a living thing of wind and ice. Inside, the house was all quiet lines and soft light, a refuge built on success and distance. Ethan stood by the window with a mug that had gone cold, watching powder curl off the eaves, listening to the hum of the generator and the faint tick of the radiant floor. He looked like the magazines always said, a man in his mid-40s with a strong jaw, broad shoulders, and eyes the color of snow-lit sky. But the easy smile people remembered at ribbon cuttings did not come tonight. On the far wall, a framed photo from years ago. Two students on a campus lawn in a fall of yellow leaves, heads tipped together like a secret. The woman in that photo had a quick laugh and a stubborn streak. He had not said her name out loud in a very long time. Clara. It was safer that way. Work had taught him how to tuck things into compartments, how to hold a conversation over the drone of engines, how to let the noise swallow what hurt. His phone buzzed where it rested on a book about navigation. Aspen Tower closed due to blizzard. Flight crews on standby. Hangars locked. The business would keep. Even grounded, luxury moved. Investors would call tomorrow. He could already hear the steady language of confidence, the numbers he knew by heart. Tonight, there was a different language in the house. Groaning, pine, fine crystals hissing against glass. The whisper of a memory he never outran no matter how many jets he launched. He turned to his desk. The surface was clear, a habit born from years of needing order when the world climbed to 30,000 feet. In the center sat a small object on a square of felt. A brass compass, its face spidered with a crack that ran between north and east. His father's. The man had carried it when he fixed engines in cramped hangars and when he took a nervous boy up in a two-seat trainer for the first time. "You do not get lost," his father used to say, "if you keep a true point and keep moving." The compass had gone with Ethan to college, to a first date on that lawn, to a night he still could not forgive himself for. He touched it now, thumb running the crack he had learned like a map. The lid squeaked a little when it opened. The needle trembled, found a place to settle, faltered, settled again. He sometimes wondered if the hairline fracture inside the glass was why the compass quivered, or if it was something else, a small ghost circling some truth he could not quite face. He closed the lid, and the room seemed quieter, as if a clock had stopped. He walked through the house, past the stone fireplace where he never built a fire alone, past the long table where board members once ate venison and praised the view. He paused at the mudroom door. Snow had blown under the outside overhang, curling like foam on a beach. He imagined another house, smaller, with chipped paint and a warm kitchen, the smell of something good on the stove, a laugh like the one in the picture. He imagined a different evening where he had chosen love over pride. Aspen was full of false quiets like this, nights when the mountain held its breath and you could hear in it every mistake you tried to file away. He should have gone to bed. He should have stalked the hall and worked off the ache, or opened a new flight plan and lost himself in altitudes and fuel burn. Instead, he stood with his hand on the doorknob and listened, as if the storm had something else to say. The house sighed. The wind shifted. The generator hummed, steady as a heartbeat. Another memory, this time of Clara's head resting on his shoulder at dusk, her voice in his ear. "Do not let this life make you hard, Ethan. Promise me." He had promised. He had failed. The first sound was small, not the scratch of branches, not the thud of roof snow, a human sound, thin and fast. He frowned, turned his head, and held still. There it was again, staccato, desperate, knocking. Not neighborly knocking, knuckles against wood in a rhythm that had panic in it. He put his mug down without looking and opened the mudroom door. Cold hit him like a wall. Snow feathered his hair, his shirt. The knocking came again from the outer door, beyond the short-covered walk, sharp and urgent. He reached for the latch, heart climbing to the same altitude as the storm, and pulled. The storm raged over Aspen like an endless wall of white, burying the valley roads and silencing the luxury airstrip Ethan Carter's company usually kept buzzing with departing jets. The glass walls of his mansion groaned under the weight of snow and wind. Inside, Ethan sat alone near the fire, a tumbler of bourbon in hand, trying not to think about the compass locked in his office safe. His father's voice echoed from years ago. "Find your direction, Ethan. Never lose it." He had, though, lost Clara, lost the family he once dreamed of. Now, all he had were empty rooms and cold success. Then came the sound. 3 sharp knocks. Urgent. Almost desperate. Ethan frowned, setting the glass down. No one traveled the ridge road in a blizzard. He rose, adjusting the lapels of his navy suit out of instinct, and crossed the wide foyer. The sound came again, louder this time, accompanied by the faintest cry. He pulled the door open, and a blast of icy wind drove snow into his face. Standing there was a boy, maybe 9 years old, trembling in boots 2 sizes too small. His cheeks were raw red, his lips cracked. He clutched the frame with one hand, holding himself steady against the gale. "Please," the boy gasped, voice breaking. "My brother, he collapsed. He's out there in the snow. I can't carry him." Ethan's chest tightened. For a heartbeat, he thought he'd imagined it, some cruel trick of memory. But then the boy's eyes lifted to his. Wide, frightened, filled with the kind of desperation no child should carry. Ethan didn't hesitate. "Where?" The boy pointed toward the slope beyond the driveway. His hand shook violently. "Just down the road. Please, sir, he's not moving." Ethan didn't bother with the coat. He stepped into the storm, the boy stumbling beside him. Snow bit his skin like glass shards, but his focus was fixed on the dark shape half buried near the drift. Another child, smaller, curled into himself, his face pale against the white. Ethan dropped to his knees, brushing snow from the boy's features. The child's skin was frighteningly cold. Without a thought, Ethan scooped him into his arms, feeling the frailty of the body pressed against his chest. He looked down once more at the older brother. The boy was clutching something in his fist, a tarnished compass, its casing cracked. Something inside Ethan twisted hard. That compass. The same design, the same scratches. Impossible. But there was no time. He carried the unconscious boy back up the drive, the older brother stumbling after them, snow swallowing their tracks as quickly as they made them. By the time they reached the mansion doors, Ethan's breath burned his throat, and the boy's small weight felt both unbearably heavy and terrifyingly light. Inside, warmth swallowed them. Ethan laid the child gently near the fire, barking orders to the housekeeper who had come running. "Blankets, hot water, call the clinic, tell them we're bringing in a child." The older boy dropped to his knees beside his brother, still clutching the broken compass in one hand. He pressed his other hand to his brother's cheek, whispering, "Wake up, please, just wake up." Ethan crouched beside them. He wanted to ask 1,000 questions: who they were, how they had ended up alone in a blizzard, why that compass looked like the one he had locked away years ago. But all he could manage was steady, quiet words. "He's going to be all right," Ethan said, though his own voice faltered. "We'll keep him warm. We'll get him help." The older boy's eyes flicked to him, filled with both fear and fragile trust. He nodded once, clutching the compass tighter. And Ethan Carter, a man who commanded fleets of jets and boardrooms full of investors, felt powerless against the storm unraveling inside his own chest. The fire crackled. throwing orange light across the stone hearth as Ethan stripped off his soaked jacket and draped it over a chair. The unconscious boy lay wrapped in thick wool blankets, his small chest rising and falling in shallow, fragile breaths. Beside him, his brother knelt close, one hand gripping the blanket edge, the other still clutching that compass as if it were the only anchor keeping him upright. Ethan crouched beside them, studying the tarnished brass. His pulse stumbled. It was more than similar. It was identical. The hinge bent the same way, the glass fractured in the same jagged line between north and east. Ethan's father had given him one just like it before his first solo flight. For years, Ethan kept it on his desk, a symbol of steady direction. But seeing it now, in the hands of a shivering boy in ragged clothes, sent a cold shiver through him deeper than the blizzard outside. "Where did you get that?" Ethan asked quietly. The boy's eyes darted up, wary. His knuckles whitened on the compass. "It was my mom's," he said. His voice was thin but firm. She said it belonged to the man she loved, but lost." The words landed like a stone in Ethan's chest. He felt the room tilt, memories clawing up from years he had buried. A fall afternoon, Clara laughing in the quad, sunlight catching her auburn hair, his hand slipping the compass into hers, promising she'd never be lost as long as she kept it. Ethan's throat tightened. "Your mother... what's her name?" The boy hesitated, lips pressed into a line. He glanced at his younger brother, then back at Ethan. "She told me not to tell strangers." Ethan almost smiled at the defiance, but it broke into something softer. The boy was protecting his family the only way he knew how. "Fair enough," Ethan murmured. "But I promise you, I'm not your enemy." The boy didn't answer. His eyes flicked back to his brother, whose breathing grew steadier under the heat of the fire. Relief softened his small face, but the compass never left his grasp. Ethan watched him for a long moment, the echo of Clara's voice rattling inside his memory. He rose and fetched a towel, gently drying the boy's wet hair. The child stiffened at first, then let him. "You were brave," Ethan said. "Walking through a storm like that. You saved your brother's life." The boy's lip trembled, though he tried to hide it. "I didn't know if you'd open the door." Ethan froze. He had meant to keep his house a fortress, walls of glass and stone to separate himself from a past that hurt too much to face. Tonight, those walls had cracked. "Why did you come here?" he asked softly. The boy's answer was barely audible. "Because your house had lights on, and Mom always said, 'Follow the light if you're lost.'" The compass glinted in his fist as if to agree. Ethan swallowed hard, suddenly unsure if he was more afraid of the storm outside or the one unraveling inside him. He glanced again at the cracked compass in the boy's hand and felt the weight of his own, locked in the safe upstairs. 2 compasses, 2 lives colliding. One truth he could no longer ignore. The fire burned bright, filling the cavernous living room with warmth, yet Ethan Carter felt colder than he had in years. He sat on the edge of the leather sofa, watching the older boy spoon hot broth carefully into his brother's mouth. The little one stirred, coughed once, then opened his eyes weakly. Relief flashed across the older boy's face, softening the fierce guard he wore like armor. "You did well," Ethan said gently, leaning forward. "What's his name?" The boy hesitated, then whispered, "Caleb." His hand smoothed the blanket over his brother's chest. "I'm Daniel." Ethan nodded, letting the names settle into him. Daniel and Caleb. He repeated them silently as if memorizing coordinates. Caleb's eyes fluttered shut again, his breathing steady now, safe. Daniel sat close, shoulders tense as if he feared the world might snatch his brother away the moment he relaxed. He turned slightly toward Ethan, his voice small. "Our mom, she's in the hospital. She got hurt at work. We tried to visit, but they wouldn't let kids stay overnight. We didn't have anywhere else to go." Ethan's breath caught. "How long have you been on your own?" Daniel shrugged, the kind of shrug that was too heavy for a child. "A while. I tried to make sure Caleb ate. Sometimes neighbors gave us food. Sometimes not." His fingers tightened around the cracked compass. But Mom told us if things got really bad, to hold on to this. He opened his hand, letting the firelight flicker over the battered brass. She said it was from the man she once loved, but lost. She told us he was good once, even if he made mistakes. She said if we found him, maybe he'd help us. Ethan's chest constricted. His voice dropped to a whisper. She said that? Daniel nodded. His eyes, so earnest and so guarded all at once, pierced Ethan more than any boardroom betrayal ever could. Ethan leaned back, staring into the flames. The memory of Clara came rushing in, her laughter under golden leaves, the warmth of her hand clutching the compass he had pressed into her palm. He had loved her fiercely, but his family's interference, his own pride, had torn them apart. He had buried her absence beneath work, deals, and endless flights. Now, here were these boys, with her eyes, with his jawline, holding the compass he had once given away. "Daniel," Ethan said slowly, his voice thick. "What's your mother's name?" The boy hesitated, studying him as though weighing truth against danger. Finally, he whispered, "Clara Hayes." The name dropped like a stone into Ethan's chest, rippling through every corner of his guarded life. He pressed a hand against his forehead, closing his eyes for a moment. Clara. She hadn't disappeared. She hadn't forgotten him. She had raised 2 sons, alone, while he buried himself in empire and silence. When he opened his eyes, Daniel was still watching him, suspicion flickering with the faintest thread of hope. Ethan cleared his throat, struggling to steady his voice. "Your mother, she was once the brightest part of my life." Daniel's eyes narrowed, and he pulled Caleb closer. "Then why weren't you there?" The question sliced through Ethan like the storm wind outside. He had no answer, not one that would heal what years of absence had carved. But the truth pressed against his lips, heavy and unrelenting. "Because I didn't fight for her, because I let pride win, because I was a coward." But all he said aloud was a whisper. "I should have been." The fire popped, sparks lifting like fragile stars. Daniel's hand tightened on the compass, as if waiting to see if Ethan's words would break apart like ash, or, finally, point true. The storm had eased to a muffled whisper against the glass walls, but inside Ethan's home, the silence was heavier than snow. Daniel had curled up on the rug near the fires, one hand still locked around the compass, his brother asleep against his chest. Ethan sat across from them, unable to look away, his mind racing with memories and questions. When dawn touched the mountains, he rose quietly, moving into his study. The safe clicked open, revealing the object he had guarded for decades. A second compass, almost identical to the one Daniel clutched. Ethan lifted it carefully, feeling its familiar weight in his palm. The lid opened with a soft squeak, and the needle quivered just as it always had. 2 compasses, 2 halves of a story he had long buried. He placed the compass on his desk, then picked up the phone. His voice was low, urgent. "Reynolds, it's Carter. I need you in Aspen. Today. Discretion." Hours later, a black SUV crawled up the snow-packed drive. Inside, a tall man in a wool coat stepped out, brushing frost from his beard. Henry Reynolds had been Ethan's private investigator for years. Loyal, thorough, relentless. "You didn't give me much on the phone," Reynolds said as he entered the study, lowering his voice once he saw the boys asleep near the fire. "What's going on?" Ethan gestured to the cracked compass on the table. "I need you to trace this, find out where it came from, who's held it, anything." Reynolds picked it up, studying the worn brass. "Looks old. Military make, maybe passed down. Why does it matter?" Ethan hesitated, then admitted, "Because I gave one just like it to Clara Hayes, 20 years ago." Reynolds' brows lifted slightly. "Clara Hayes, the one who disappeared?" Ethan nodded, his throat tight. "I thought she left. I thought she cut all ties. But last night, 2 boys showed up at my door in the middle of a blizzard. One of them was holding this, and Clara is their mother." Reynolds' gaze sharpened. "And you think—" "I don't think," Ethan cut in, his voice low. "I know. They're mine." For the first time in years, Ethan felt the weight of truth pressing on him. His empire had been built on control, precision, and denial. But this was chaos breaking through, demanding answers. Reynolds set the compass down gently. "I'll dig. Hospital records, court files, anything I can find. But Carter, if this comes out, the press will eat it alive. Hidden children, a vanished lover, that's blood in the water." Ethan's jaw clenched. "I don't care about the press. I care about the truth. Find Clara. Find out what happened." Reynolds gave a short nod and left, leaving Ethan alone with the weight of his confession. He returned to the fire. Daniel's eyes flickered open, suspicion rising as he saw Ethan watching him. "You sent someone," Daniel said flatly. Ethan didn't lie. "Yes, I need to know what happened to your mom." Daniel pulled Caleb closer. "She didn't want strangers digging around. She said people hurt her before." Ethan's chest tightened. He wanted to reach out, to promise he wasn't one of those people, but the truth was more complicated. His silence, his absence, had been its own kind of wound. "You have my word," Ethan said quietly. "I'm not here to hurt her. I just need to make things right." Daniel studied him for a long moment, the compass clutched tight. Finally, he muttered, "We'll see." And Ethan Carter, a man used to closing deals with iron confidence, realized this. Earning back trust from a child who carried his eyes and Clara's voice would be the hardest negotiation of his life. The storm had passed by morning, leaving Aspen glazed in silver light. Snow glittered on the slopes, sharp and pure. Ethan Carter stood by the tall windows, watching the mountains breathe in silence. Behind him, the crackle of the fire was the only sound until his phone buzzed. Reynolds' voice came through, low and deliberate. "I found her." Ethan's grip tightened on the phone. "Clara?" "She's listed under her maiden name, Clara Hayes. She's in St. Luke's Medical Center in Denver. A workplace injury 3 weeks ago. Slipped disc, complications. She's been in and out of care since. No listed emergency contacts." Ethan's chest tightened. "And the boys?" "They've been on their own. Neighbors helped when they could, but no formal guardianship. Social services flagged the case, but with the blizzard and overflow, nothing moved fast." Ethan pressed a hand to his forehead, pacing the length of the window. The ache in his chest deepened with every word. Clara, strong, stubborn Clara, had carried all of this alone. Because of him. "There's more," Reynolds added. "Birth records, no father listed. But the timelines line up, Ethan. The boys are yours. I'd stake my reputation on it. If you want absolute confirmation, I'll get a DNA test," Ethan said, his voice rough. When he ended the call, his reflection in the glass looked foreign. The polished suit, the sharp jaw, the man who had everything but had lost what mattered most. He turned toward the fire. Daniel was awake, staring at him with guarded eyes. "You were talking about Mom," Daniel said. Ethan didn't deny it. He walked over, kneeling beside him. "Yes, I know where she is. She's hurt. But alive, and I need to see her." Daniel's grip tightened around the cracked compass. "She told us not to trust strangers." Ethan's voice softened. "She was right to be careful. But Daniel—" He hesitated, then pulled open the safe again. He retrieved his own compass, identical but whole, and placed it gently beside Daniel's. The boy's eyes widened. The two compasses lay together, twins separated by decades. Ethan whispered, "I gave this one to your mother a long time ago. She kept it. She passed it to you. That means I'm not a stranger." Daniel blinked rapidly, confusion and suspicion fighting against something softer. His lip trembled, though he tried to hide it. "Why weren't you there?" he asked, voice cracking. The words struck harder than any boardroom ambush. Ethan drew a shaky breath. "Because I failed her. Because I let pride and fear decide for me. And I've regretted it every day since." Daniel studied him, eyes dark with something Ethan couldn't quite read. He pulled Caleb closer, whispering to his brother as if protecting him from a truth too heavy. Ethan's voice was firm now. "But I won't fail again. I'll prove it to you. You'll never be cold again. You'll never wonder if you're alone." The boy's gaze dropped to the twin compasses. For the first time, the iron guard in his expression cracked just slightly. He touched the unbroken compass with his fingertip, as if testing whether the man in front of him was real. Ethan sat back, giving him space. He knew redemption wouldn't come overnight. Trust had to be built, piece by fragile piece, but tonight had given him direction, and for the first time in years, the compass inside him pointed true. The fire had burned low by the time Ethan finally sat alone at his desk. The house was quiet, except for the occasional sigh of wind slipping through the eaves. Daniel and Caleb were asleep in the guest room upstairs, curled under blankets that seemed far too heavy for such small frames. Ethan had stood in the doorway for a long time, watching their even breaths, before retreating to the study. On his desk, the twin compasses lay side by side. The cracked one Daniel clutched, the unbroken one he had guarded all these years. Their needles quivered faintly, as if some invisible force bound them together. Ethan stared at them until his vision blurred. He wanted to believe the boy's presence was a gift, but another voice whispered, "A reckoning." Years he couldn't recover, memories he couldn't rewrite. When dawn thinned the edges of night, Ethan drove the boys into town for tests at a private clinic. The staff whispered as soon as they saw him, the CEO of Carter Aviation walking in with two thin boys in threadbare jackets. Ethan ignored the stares. Blood draws, paperwork, signatures. The boys stayed close to each other, Caleb clutching Daniel's hand, Daniel watching every move with suspicion. "It's just a quick test," Ethan reassured. "It doesn't hurt much." Daniel's eyes locked on him. "What if it proves you're lying?" Ethan swallowed hard. "Then I'll accept it. But if it proves what I believe, it means you're my sons, and nothing will keep me from you again." The nurse guided them out, leaving Ethan alone with the weight of truth hovering. Hours later, Reynolds returned, file in hand. His expression was grave, but his eyes flickered with something softer. "It's conclusive," Reynolds said quietly. "They're yours, both of them." Ethan sat back heavily, the air leaving his chest in a rush. His sons. The words felt foreign and sacred all at once. His gaze lifted toward the hallway where their muffled laughter carried faintly as they played with a puzzle one of the nurses had given them. A knot inside him broke, replaced by something sharp and tender. Yet guilt clawed immediately after. He had missed their first steps, their first words, birthdays, nights when they cried for comfort and only Clara had answered. He had been building jets while his sons went without shoes. When they returned to Aspen, the boys dozed in the back seat. Ethan glanced at them in the mirror, a raw ache flooding his chest. He whispered to himself, "How do I make up for years I can't give back?" Back at the mansion, Daniel woke first. His voice was quiet, almost accusing. "You're only helping us because you feel guilty." Ethan didn't deny it. "I am guilty. I wasn't there when you needed me, Tao. But I don't want to just pay for mistakes. I want to be your father, if you'll let me." Daniel looked out the window, jaw set. "Mom said we can't trust people who leave." Ethan's throat tightened. He reached into his coat and pulled out a photo he kept tucked away, a faded picture of Clara from college days. He placed it gently on the table beside Daniel's compass. "I left once," he admitted, his voice shaking, "and it destroyed me. But I won't leave again. Not now. Not ever." Daniel's eyes flicked to the photo, then to the compasses. His lips trembled, but he turned away before Ethan could see the tears. Upstairs, Caleb's soft voice carried through the hall. "Is he really our dad?" Ethan's chest clenched. He didn't answer out loud, but inside he vowed, "Yes, and this time I'll prove it every day." Snow fell gently now, a calm after the storm. Ethan Carter stood in the grand kitchen, sleeves rolled, making cocoa the way his mother used to, milk simmering, chocolate shaved fine. He wasn't sure if the boys would even drink it, but he had to try. Small gestures were the only tools he had left. Daniel lingered near the doorway, shoulders tense, watching every move. Caleb sat at the counter, head resting on his arms, still pale, but smiling faintly. Ethan slid 2 mugs across. "Careful, it's hot." Caleb took a sip, his eyes widening. "It's good." Daniel didn't touch his mug. His gaze stayed sharp, mistrust plain. Ethan leaned against the counter, choosing honesty over charm. "I can't change the years I wasn't there," Ethan said quietly. "But I can promise this: no more cold nights, no more wondering where your next meal comes from. You'll have warmth, safety, and a future." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Words don't mean much. People make promises all the time." Ethan met his stare. "You're right. So I'll show you instead." Later that afternoon, he took them outside. The blizzard had left the grounds blanketed in untouched snow, glittering under pale sun. Ethan handed Daniel a wooden sled, then knelt to fasten Caleb's boots. "Ever sled before?" Ethan asked. Caleb's eyes brightened. "Once, on cardboard." Ethan smiled softly. "This will be better." They trudged up the slope behind the house. Daniel hung back at first, arms crossed, but Caleb tugged his sleeve. "Come on, Danny." Reluctantly, Daniel followed. At the top, Ethan steadied the sled. "Hold on tight." With a push, the boys shot down, their laughter breaking the silence of the estate. Caleb whooped, and even Daniel's guarded expression cracked into something close to joy. Ethan watched from the ridge, a lump rising in his throat. He had flown jets across continents, but nothing felt as exhilarating as hearing his sons laugh together in the snow. That evening, they gathered by the fire. Caleb curled close to Ethan, listening as he read aloud from an old adventure novel. Daniel sat further back, compass in hand, eyes darting between the story and Ethan's face. When Ethan closed the book, Caleb whispered, "Good night, Dad." The word hit Ethan like a jolt. His throat tightened. He smoothed Caleb's hair, voice husky. "Good night, son." Daniel said nothing. He stood, guiding Caleb upstairs. At the top of the stairs he paused, glancing back. His eyes shimmered in the firelight, conflicted, but not entirely closed. Then he turned away. Alone by the fire, Ethan leaned back, exhaustion and hope colliding in his chest. He knew trust couldn't be won overnight. He knew Daniel carried scars deeper than snowdrifts. But he also knew this. For the first time in decades, he wasn't lost. The compass on the mantel pointed steady. True. The next morning broke clear and sharp, sun bouncing off snow like shards of glass. Ethan Carter woke early, restless, his thoughts circling the same truth. He had 2 sons upstairs who barely trusted him, and a woman in Denver who still carried the scars of his absence. He dressed in a navy sweater and slacks instead of his usual suit, hoping a softer image might feel less like the CEO the world knew and more like the man his sons needed. As he stepped into the hall, he heard whispers from the guest room. Caleb's voice was faint. "Danny, he read to us. He made cocoa. Maybe he's really Dad." Daniel's reply was low, guarded. "Mom said don't trust strangers. Just because he says things doesn't make them true." The words stung, but Ethan didn't step away. Instead, he knocked gently. Daniel opened the door, jaw tight. "What do you want?" Ethan met his eyes steadily. "To show you something." He led them to his study. On the desk lay the twin compasses. Daniel froze, his hand instinctively tightening on the cracked one. Ethan opened the lid of his own, the needle trembling faintly before settling north. "This belonged to my father," Ethan said quietly. "He gave it to me the day I first flew alone. Years later, I gave one just like it to Clara Hayes, the woman I loved more than anything. She kept it, passed it to you. Daniel's eyes flicked between the two compasses, his defenses cracking. So, if that's true, then... Ethan's voice broke. Then I'm not a stranger. I'm your father. Silence filled the study. Caleb's small hand reached for Ethan's compass, tracing the smooth glass. His voice was soft. They're like twins. Like us. Daniel's lip trembled, though he tried to hold it steady. Why should we believe you? Why now, after all this time? Ethan drew a shaky breath. Because I was a coward once. I let family pressure and pride steal Clara from me. I thought she'd moved on. I never knew about you, but I know now, and I'll spend the rest of my life proving I won't leave again. Daniel swallowed hard, blinking fast. He lifted the cracked compass, holding it beside Ethan's. The two needles quivered, then steadied together, as if drawn by some unseen thread. Caleb whispered, "Mom said compasses always find home." The words cut through Ethan's chest. He reached out, but stopped short, letting Daniel decide. After a long pause, Daniel placed the cracked compass in Ethan's palm, just for a heartbeat, before snatching it back. "You don't get to keep it," Daniel muttered, but his voice had lost some of its edge. Ethan nodded. "I don't need to. Just knowing you have it is enough." For the first time, Daniel's eyes softened, though he quickly turned away. "We'll see," he said, echoing his words from before. Later, as the boys played in the snow, Ethan stood by the window, both compasses on the desk behind him. The world outside seemed brighter, steadier. For the first time in years, he felt like he'd been given direction, not from charts or boardrooms, but from two boys who didn't yet know if they could love him. Aspen's nights had a way of holding silence like a secret. That evening, Ethan Carter found himself in the great room again, firelight flickering across the glass walls while Daniel and Caleb curled under blankets nearby. Caleb drifted quickly into sleep, his head on his brother's shoulder, but Daniel stayed awake, compass resting in his palm like a weapon he refused to set down. Ethan pulled a book from the shelf, an old copy of Treasure Island. His father had once read it to him by flashlight on nights when the hangar power went out. He opened the pages, his voice steady as he began, "Squire Trelawney, Dr. Livesey, and the rest of these gentlemen, having asked me to write down the whole particulars." Caleb's breaths grew slow and deep. Daniel's eyes, though, stayed fixed on Ethan, as if testing each word for cracks. When Ethan closed the book, he spoke softly. "My father used to read that to me. He told me stories were like compasses. When you're lost, they remind you who you are." Daniel's brow furrowed. "Did you tell Mom that? Is that why she kept the compass?" Ethan's voice faltered. "Yes, I gave it to her when we were young. I told her it meant she'd never be lost, no matter what happened." He glanced at the twin compasses on the table. "Looks like she believed it." Silence stretched. Then, unexpectedly, Daniel whispered, "Good night, Dad." The word, fragile and uncertain, struck Ethan harder than any boardroom deal or investor threat. His chest tightened. He whispered back, "Good night, son." Daniel looked away quickly, pretending to adjust Caleb's blanket. But Ethan had seen the tears glimmering before the boy hid them. The next morning, laughter echoed through the snow-covered grounds. Caleb tumbled off a sled into a drift, squealing, while Daniel, cheeks flushed red, tried to act unimpressed but laughed anyway. Ethan joined them, pushing sleds, steadying small boots, letting snow soak his expensive trousers without caring. Later, they returned inside, cheeks pink, hair damp. Ethan prepared grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup. Simple food, but it filled the kitchen with warmth. Caleb grinned between bites. "Best sandwich ever." Daniel muttered, "It's okay," but his mouth curved upward despite himself. That night, as Ethan tucked them into the guest room, Caleb whispered again, "Good night, Dad." This time, Daniel didn't correct him. He simply pulled the blanket higher around his brother and gave Ethan the briefest nod, almost imperceptible. Alone later, Ethan sat by the fire, phone buzzing with emails and market updates. He silenced it. None of it mattered in that moment. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about mergers or jet deliveries. He was thinking about two boys upstairs who had called him Dad, even if only in whispers. The compasses rested on the mantel, twin needles steady. Ethan traced the crack in one with his eyes, wondering if it was less a flaw and more a reminder. Broken things could still point true, and maybe, just maybe, so could he. The following week, Aspen buzzed with headlines hotter than any winter fire. Ethan Carter's name splashed across financial blogs, tabloids, and national news. Aviation CEO hides secret family. Children discovered in Aspen mansion during blizzard. Ethan sat at the long oak table in his study, the morning paper folded in his hands. His jaw clenched as he read the words, each headline sharper than the last. Across the room, Daniel leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, suspicion clouding his eyes again. "They're saying we're your secret," Daniel said flatly. Ethan lowered the paper, his voice steady but pained. "You're not a secret. You're my sons, and the world may not understand that yet, but I'll make sure they do." Daniel looked unconvinced. "Mom always said people like you care more about money than family." The words cut deeper than any article. Ethan rose slowly, approaching his son. "She wasn't wrong to worry. For too long, I let business come first. But that's changing. You're changing it." Before Daniel could reply, Ethan's phone rang. The name flashing on the screen was Harold Klein, chairman of Carter Aviation's board. Ethan answered, voice clipped. "Harold." The older man's tone was sharp. "Ethan, what are we supposed to tell shareholders? The press is circling like vultures. They're questioning your judgment. This could ground our stock if you don't control it." Ethan's eyes flicked to Daniel, who was listening intently. "I'm not hiding from this," Ethan said firmly. "If shareholders want to know who I am, they'll see a father who refuses to abandon his children." Harold scoffed. "Be reasonable. A scandal like this? I've built this company from the ground up." Ethan cut in. "And I'll defend it. But I won't sacrifice my sons to keep a spotless image. Not now, not ever." He ended the call, pulse pounding. Daniel's eyes narrowed, but not with anger, something softer, searching. "You'd risk your company for us?" Ethan knelt down, his gaze level with Daniel's. "I'd risk everything, because no empire is worth more than the two of you." The boy's lip trembled, though he masked it with a shake of his head. "We'll see," he muttered, retreating upstairs. That evening, Ethan stood before the glass walls, watching twilight fall over the snowy peaks. His reflection looked older, wearier, but clearer. For years, he had defined himself by deals and destinations. Now, headlines threatened to undo it all, but in the guest room upstairs, two boys slept safe and warm, blankets tucked high, bellies full. That was worth every battle ahead. Still, as he traced the crack in the compass on his desk, doubt gnawed. Could he really be the father they needed? Could he rebuild trust on ground so fractured? The storm outside had passed, but the storm within was only beginning. Morning sunlight spilled over the snow-draped valley, casting the mountains in gold. Ethan Carter stood before a podium inside a Denver conference hall, cameras flashing, microphones angled toward him. Shareholders filled the seats, their expressions a mix of curiosity, judgment, and hunger for scandal. Behind the stage, Daniel and Caleb waited with Reynolds, uncertain, but watching. Ethan cleared his throat, his voice steady, though his heart pounded. "You've read the headlines. Some of you came here today expecting excuses. You won't get them. What you'll get is truth." The room shifted uneasily. Ethan gripped the edges of the podium. "Yes, I recently discovered I have two sons. Two boys who survived hardships no child should endure. And yes, I failed them by not being there, but I will not fail them again." Murmurs rippled. A reporter called out, "Mr. Carter, what does this mean for your company?" Ethan drew a breath. It means Carter Aviation stands for more than jets and profits. From this day forward, it stands for responsibility, for shelter, for children who have no one to fight for them. He paused, then gestured toward the side of the stage. Reynolds stepped forward with a velvet box. Ethan opened it, revealing a plaque etched with a compass rose. Today, I am founding the Compass Foundation. We're pledging $20 million to build shelters for homeless children, starting here in Colorado. No child should freeze in a winter storm, wondering if they'll see another sunrise. The hall fell silent. Cameras clicked rapidly. Ethan's voice softened but carried. I built an empire chasing altitude. Now, I want to build something that keeps children safe on the ground. Applause began slowly, then grew until the hall vibrated with sound. Some shareholders still frowned, calculating risks, but others nodded with respect. Ethan stepped back, relief mingling with resolve. Behind the curtain, Daniel stared at him, wide-eyed. When Ethan approached, the boy crossed his arms. You really just did that? Gave away all that money? Ethan crouched to his level, smiling faintly. Money can buy planes, houses, headlines, but it can't buy back years I missed with you and Caleb. This is something worth spending it on. Daniel bit his lip, torn between defiance and wonder. Caleb slipped his hand into Ethan's, beaming. That means kids like us won't be cold anymore. Ethan squeezed his small hand. Exactly. Daniel's gaze softened for just a moment. Mom always said, people show who they are by what they give up. Ethan's throat tightened. Then I hope today shows her, and you, that I finally learned what matters. Back in Aspen that evening, the three of them sat by the fire. Caleb curled against Ethan's side, dozing. Daniel sat across, compass in his palm, watching the flames. You really meant it, Daniel said finally. Ethan nodded. Every word. Daniel studied him for a long moment. Then, slowly, he whispered, Good night, Dad. This time, there was no hesitation in his voice. Ethan closed his eyes, the word filling the hollow places inside him. For the first time, he felt whole. Christmas morning arrived with the sunlight glittering on the snow, the valley quiet except for the crunch of deer moving through the trees. Inside the Aspen mansion, the fire roared, stockings hung on the stone hearth. Daniel and Caleb sat cross-legged by the tree, eyes darting between the wrapped gifts and Ethan Carter, who stood nearby with a nervous smile. Go on, Ethan urged. Open them. The boys tore into the wrapping. Boxes revealed warm coats, books, sleds, and toys. Caleb squealed with joy, but Daniel was slower, cautious as always. At last, Ethan handed them each a small velvet box. They opened them together. Inside lay 2 silver compasses on fine chains, each engraved on the back with the words, Never Lost Again. Daniel's breath caught. Caleb's eyes filled with tears. For a moment, neither spoke. Ethan's voice was husky. These aren't just gifts. They're promises. Wherever life takes you, you'll always find your way home. Caleb lunged forward, throwing his arms around Ethan's neck. Thank you, Dad. The word echoed warm and certain. Ethan held him close, his own eyes damp. Daniel stared at his compass, thumb tracing the words. His face shifted, fear, hope, disbelief colliding. Slowly, he stood, walked to Ethan, and pressed his small body against him in a trembling hug. Dad, he whispered. Ethan's arms closed around both boys, his heart breaking open under the weight of the word. For the first time in decades, he wasn't alone. He was a father. They spent the day sledding on the hill, cocoa warming their hands, laughter filling the air. For every smile, Ethan felt years of regret loosen their grip. Clara's absence was still a wound, but her presence in the boys was undeniable, her strength in Daniel's eyes, her kindness in Caleb's smile. That evening, as the fire burned low, Ethan sat between his sons. They leaned against him, tired but content, compasses glinting in the firelight. He kissed the tops of their heads, his voice low. "You'll never have to wonder again. You'll never be lost." Daniel whispered, "Promise?" Ethan met his gaze, steady and true. "Promise." For the first time, Daniel smiled without hiding it. Caleb giggled, clutching his compass. The storm that had once threatened to swallow them had led instead to this, a family reborn. Ethan Carter, who had spent years chasing altitude, finally felt grounded in the only place that mattered. The new year dawned clear and bright over Aspen, sunlight bouncing off the peaks as if the mountains themselves were starting fresh. Inside the glass mansion, laughter spilled through the halls instead of silence. Daniel and Caleb chased each other across the rugs, compasses swinging on their chains, while Ethan Carter watched from the doorway, coffee in hand and a smile tugging at his lips. A knock sounded at the door, gentle, hesitant. Ethan opened it to find Clara, pale from recovery but standing strong, a scarf wrapped around her shoulders. Her auburn hair, streaked with silver now, caught the sunlight. For a heartbeat, time folded, and Ethan saw the girl he'd once loved on a fall campus lawn. "Clara," he whispered. Her eyes softened as they swept past him to the boys. Daniel shouted first. "Mom!" He and Caleb bolted forward, wrapping themselves around her. She held them close, tears streaking her cheeks. When she finally looked up at Ethan, her voice trembled. "You took care of them." Ethan swallowed hard. "I should have been there years ago. I can't change the past, but I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you don't carry it alone." For a long moment, she studied him, the man he'd become, older, scarred by regret, but steadier. At last, she gave a small nod. "Then we'll see." Weeks later, Ethan stood at the Carter Aviation Board meeting, flanked by Daniel and Caleb in pressed shirts and Clara seated quietly at the back. Headlines had shifted. What once read scandal now read redemption. Investors saw the Compass Foundation's first shelter breaking ground in Denver. Ethan spoke not as a CEO chasing expansion, but as a father building legacy. "I used to think altitude defined success," he told the room, "but I've learned true success is found on the ground, at a dinner table, by a fire, in the laughter of your children. That is where legacy lives." Applause filled the room. Clara's eyes glistened. Daniel leaned closer to Caleb, whispering, "He means us." That night, back in Aspen, the four of them sat by the fire. Ethan handed the boys a leather-bound journal. On the first page, he had written in his careful hand, "Our story, never lost again." "Every step we take from here," Ethan said softly, "we'll write it together." Caleb curled against his side, Daniel resting on the other. Clara sat across, compass glinting at her throat, her smile tired but real. Outside, snow fell lightly, gentle now, no longer the storm that once threatened to bury them. Inside, the house felt full for the first time. Ethan Carter, who once chased skies, now found his compass steady, not pointing north, but home.